grab your cup, settle in, because today we're going about 550 kilometers straight up. Amazon just announced that it has deployed enough satellites to start selling you internet from space later this year. Call it a milestone because it is one for Amazon, but nobody in that press release is talking about what I want to talk about. What happens to your threat model when your internet service provider is a spacecraft? Welcome back to Darnley Cyber Cafe. I'm Darnley. Tune in, unwind with your preferred cup of Java, not script. Let's start with the news, because the headlines have been a little breathless about it. Amazon's satellite broadband project, you probably know it as Project Kuiper, though Amazon renamed it to Amazon Leo back in November of last year, just crossed a threshold. The company shipped another batch of satellites into orbit using a United Launch Alliance Atlas V rocket, bringing its total constellation to somewhere north of 390 satellites. According to Chris Weber, Amazon Leo's VP of Business and Product, that's enough to support what he described as a continuous service across a network's initial latitudes. So in translation, Amazon believes it now has enough hardware in the sky to flip the switch on commercial service later this year. Not everywhere. Geographically, it will be limited at first, centralized in a handful of markets, but it's real. Amazon has been running a quiet enterprise preview with select business customers since November. And now we're looking at an actual consumer and government rollout somewhere on the near horizon. But a bit of a quick context on the numbers, because I think this does matter. Back in 2020, the FCC authorized Amazon to deploy more than 3,000 satellites, 3,236 to be exact, into low Earth orbit. That license comes with teeth. Amazon is required to get half that constellation operational by the end of July of this year of 2026, and the rest by 2029, or risk losing the authorization entirely. So part of what you're watching right now isn't purely Amazon hit a cool technical milestone. It is also Amazon is racing the regulatory clock. Worth remembering the next time a company frames a deadline as a victory lap. Now for scale, this isn't Amazon's first attempt at cracking this market conceptually. Satellite broadband has a graveyard behind it. Bill Gates backed an earlier low Earth orbit venture called Teledisk in the 1990s. It collapsed in 2002 because the technology of the era simply wasn't ready. OneWeb itself went through bankruptcy in 2020 before re-emerging under new ownership. The point isn't nostalgia, it's that this is a generally hard, capital-intensive, previously graveyard-strewn industry, and the fact that 3 or 4 serious players are now simultaneously viable tells you something about how far the underlying technology has actually come. Now here's the part where this makes interesting form in a market and a security perspective. Amazon is not building this in a vacuum. It's stepping into a ring where SpaceX Starlink has roughly a 4-year head start, and where several other serious players have been quietly building for years. So let's do the roll call. Starlink is the incumbent, and it isn't close. SpaceX has somewhere north of 10,000 satellites in orbit, and depending on whose count you trust this month, somewhere between 6 and 10 million subscribers across more than 100 countries. Starlink launched commercially in 2020, has a direct-to-cell partnerships with carriers like T-Mobile, and holds meaningful government and defense contracts. If satellite internet were a bar fight, Starlink already owns the bar. Then there's OneWeb, now folded into Eutelsat after a merger. OneWeb doesn't sell you or me directly, it's a business-to-business play, selling capacity through telecom partners and leaning on higher inclination, polar-friendly orbits that give it a strong high latitude coverage. It's carved out a defensible niche in enterprise, government, and defense contracts, particularly in Europe, where there's a genuine political appetite not to be entirely dependent on one American company's satellite network for critical connectivity. Telesat is building its own Lightspeed constellation. It's smaller in scale, but already sitting on $1 billion order backlog before it's even fully deployed. Betting on guaranteed performance contracts and hybrid LEO-GEO integration, rather than trying to basically outscale Starlink on raw satellite count. Then there is IRIS, the European Union's own sovereign satellite constellation, a roughly €10 billion project, majority publicly funded, designed explicitly so Europe isn't relying on a foreign company for secure government and defense communication. Now, that one alone should tell you that this isn't just consumer broadband story. It's a geopolitical infrastructure story. Amazon's angle into all of this leans on its ecosystem. LEO satellites use optical inter-satellite links and Ka-band phased array antennas. And Amazon is selling 3 terminal tiers, Nano, Pro, and Ultra, mirroring Starlink's mini standard high-performance dishes. But the real differentiator is Amazon keeps returning to is AWS. Deep integration with Amazon Web Services and its ground station infrastructure means LEO is being pitched hard at enterprise and government customers who are already living inside Amazon's cloud. Connectivity and compute sold as one bundle, with the promise of lower latency for cloud-dependent workloads. No one announced consumer pricing yet for LEO. The safe bet, based on everything Amazon has said publicly, it is that it lands close to Starlink's existing tiers. Starlink residential runs around $55 a month plus hardware, with business tiers running well over $100. Amazon will want to be competitive, not cheap, because cheap doesn't fund a $10 billion constellation. So the pros here. Why does any of this matter beyond big companies building expensive space hardware? Well, because satellite internet, when it works, solves a real problem: connectivity where fiber and cell towers cannot reach. Rural communities, remote islands, maritime vessels, aircraft, disaster zones where terrestrial infrastructure just got wiped out. This is where low Earth orbit constellations earn their keep. Unlike the other geostationary satellite internet some of you remember, the kind with 600 plus millisecond latency that made a video call feel like talking on the moon. LEO systems sit much closer to Earth. We're talking 20 to 40 millisecond latency, which is generally usable for video conferencing, cloud applications, and even some real-time gaming. Now, there's a resilience angle here too. When hurricanes, wildfires, or armed conflict take out ground infrastructure, a disk that talks straight to orbit doesn't care that the local cell tower is burned down. This is precisely why Starlink terminals became lifelines in Ukraine, and precisely why competition in this space is good news for anyone who might one day need a backup connection if it isn't tied to local infrastructure. And competition itself is a pro. Right now, Starlink effectively sets the price and terms because it's the only real option most people can actually buy today. When Amazon Leo, OneWeb, Telesat all have live commercial service running in parallel, that's downward pressure on price and upward pressure on performance and reliability commitments for everybody's customers, not just Amazon's. So the cons. Let's take the coffee commercial glow off this for a minute, because satellite internet has real limitations, and it isn't the fiber killer some headlines imply. Cost is still the first wall you hit. We're talking $55 a month and up for residential service plus hardware costs that can run several $100s before you even factor in power draw. Starlink dishes pull somewhere in the range of 100 to 175 watts continuously, which does add up on an electric bill in a way wired broadband simply doesn't. This also applies for anyone using this off-grid. The weather is a real factor here. Ka-band systems, which both Starlink and Amazon Leo lean on, degrade in heavy rain and storms. Leo constellations recover faster than older geostationary systems because you got satellite diversity working in your favor, but this is not immune. Congestion is a growing concern too. As more users pile onto a fixed number of satellites over a given area, speeds degrade. This is already documented pattern with Starlink in denser markets. More satellites do help, but it isn't infinite bandwidth. And then there's the orbital debris problem. The Kessler syndrome risk that gets less airtime than it deserves. Now, I'm talking about tens of thousands of satellites from multiple countries, multiple companies, all occupying the same general slice of the low Earth orbit. Every additional mega constellation raises the theoretical risk of a debris cascade that can make parts of the low Earth orbit unusable for everyone. That's not a cybersecurity risk in the traditional sense, but it is an infrastructure risk every one of these companies is quietly betting won't materialize on their watch. Alright, well, coffee's still hot, and this is where I earned the cyber in Darnley Cyber Cafe. Now, I want to talk about the uncomfortable truth. The more of our connectivity we push into orbit, the more attractive that orbit becomes as a target. And this isn't a theoretical anymore. Back in April of this year, in 2026, the NSA, alongside Australia's Signals Directorate and counterpart agencies in Canada and New Zealand, put out a joint advisory specifically about low Earth orbit satellite communication systems, Starlink included. Their message? These networks face a real and growing range of cyber threats, and organizations relying on them need to take the unique challenges seriously. This is not a marketing copy. That's 4 national security agencies going on the record together. And the threats they've worried about are not science fiction. They are documented, reporting that Chinese state-sponsored actors have been developing capabilities specifically designed to deny, exploit, or hijack satellites. The kind of capability that, in a worst case, can let an adversary seize control of satellite outright and knock out whatever communications, targeting, or intelligence function is riding on it. A separate Chinese-linked campaign known as the Salt Typhoon has also been tied to targeting Viasat, a major satellite provider for the US government and military. Now, on the Russian side, security researchers have documented a threat group known as the Secret Blizzard, also called Turla, specifically going after devices connected to Starlink, using compromised infrastructure and stolen credentials to find their way onto misconfigured terminals. Through the Russia-Ukraine conflict, we've seen everything from denial of service attacks on Starlink's own infrastructure by the hacktivist group Killnet, to malware planting on Android tablets used by Ukrainian soldiers, specifically built to harvest Starlink-related data. This is an active, ongoing battlefield, and not a hypothetical one. Now, here's the part I think is generally underappreciated. Some of the scariest satellite research isn't about hacking the satellites at all. It's all about the hacking the box sitting on your yard. A few years back, a Belgian security researcher named Leonard Wolters demonstrated something at Black Hat that could make anyone in the industry sit up. He built a mod chip, about $25 in off-the-shelf parts, soldered onto a small circuit board, and used it to perform what is called a voltage fault injection attack against a Starlink user terminal. So in plain language, he glitched the power delivery to the chip at precisely the right moment during boot, which then caused the terminal's earliest bootloader, the part burned permanently into silicone and never patchable, to fail in a way that handed him root access, full code execution. And because that particular weakness lives in a first stage bootloader backed into the hardware itself, it is by design unfixable through any software update. So to be clear, routers did the responsible thing and disclosed it through SpaceX's own bug bounty program before going public. Real credit to both the researcher and to SpaceX for running that program in the first place. But the underlying lesson doesn't disappear just because it was handled well. Physical access to satellite hardware creates a permanent weak point that no patch cycle can ever close. Now there's a second related problem. Legacy terminal debt already sitting in orbit. A lot of older satellites is what I mean. Not the brand new low Earth orbit constellations, but decades old satellites still operating. Were built on the assumption that being hundreds of kilometers up made them inherently safe. Many were launched without the meaningful encryption, with no way to be patched remotely at all. An old unpatchable satellite is a persistent vulnerability that attackers can return to again and again indefinitely. New constellations like Starlink and LEO are built with far better security fundamentals, but they do inherit a different problem. Because they are deeply tied into cloud platforms and third-party ground station services, they are exposed to the same misconfiguration and supply chain risks as any other modern IT environment. Now, this brings me to the broader architecture problem because it isn't unique to Starlink or Amazon. Every ground station is fundamentally an IT network running on commercial infrastructure, managed by people who can be phished, using VPNs that could be misconfigured, sitting on cloud programs that can be breached like any other cloud platform. Why would a sophisticated attacker spend a fortune trying to physically jam or hack a satellite 500 kilometers up when the mission operations center is on the ground is functionally like a data center? Standard network infiltration, standard supply chain attacks against trusted software vendors, standard credential phishing attack against operations staff. That's the actual attack surface for most of these systems. And it looks like every other corporate breach we've covered on the show. There's also a quieter, human-scale version of this risk, and it's one that actually applies to most of you listening. Your Starlink dish, or eventually your Amazon LEO terminal, isn't magically more secure just because the signal comes from space. It is a network-connected device sitting at the edge of your home network, an IoT endpoint, functionally identical to risk terms to your router or your smart thermostat. The directional nature of these dishes does make casual signal interception generally difficult for a random nearby attacker. That part of the marketing does hold up. I'll give you credit. However, the realistic threat to a home user isn't someone intercepting your satellite uplink from a boat offshore. It's the same story I tell you every single week on the show. Weak Wi-Fi passwords, default credentials on smart devices, unpatched firmware, and a flat home network where one compromised smart camera can talk to your laptop. Faster satellite internet just means more devices get connected, which means more entry points. Unless you segment your network and patch your firmware like you would any other ISP. Which circles back to the principle I keep returning to on this show: security tooling and infrastructure. Even genuinely well-engineered infrastructure with a secure boot, encrypted links, and public bug bounty program, all of which are real and meaningful commitments, is a complement to good hygiene, not a substitute for it. The encryption on these networks is solid. The secure boot process is a legitimate security control. None of that helps if your smart plug on your desk still has the factory password on it. Okay, so what does all this leave us, and what does it mean for you? If you're a home user and Amazon LEO or Starlink is your best or only option for broadband, use it. But treat it like the terminal, like any other internet gateway. Change default credentials on everything downstream of it. Keep firmware updated. Segment your Internet of Things devices from your primary devices. And don't assume it's satellite, so it's inherently more secure. No. If your business or government customer evaluating LEO providers, and I know some of you listening are exactly in that position. The encryption and bug bounty programs matter, but push harder on questions about ground station security, supply chain vetting for terminal hardware, and incident response commitments. That 2026 joint advisory from the NSA and its partner agencies is a useful starting document if you want a serious risk framework instead of a vendor sales deck. And if you're just listening this as a consumer of tech news, keep an eye out on how it plays out geopolitically, not just commercially. IRIS exists because Europe does not want its critical communications dependent on one company. Multiple nations are actively developing the capability to interfere with satellite communications during a conflict. This is infrastructure, and infrastructure is always eventually a security story. Now, I'll be honest with you, I don't think there's a clean solution here yet. And I'm not going to pretend that there's one just to wrap up this neatly. The industry is still working on its ground station security standards. Hardware security for consumer terminals is still catching up to the decades of hard-earned IoT security lessons and geopolitical tension around satellite infrastructure, and is only going to intensify when more of these constellations go up and live. Now, that's an honest, uncomfortable place to leave it, but it's unfortunately the truth. I'm Darnley, and this has been Darnley Cyber Cafe, where your digital exhaust stops here. Stay sharp, stay private, and remember, the less you leave behind, the less they have on you. If today's episode gave you something to think about, do me a favor, hit follow, leave a rating, or share this with someone who needs to hear it. It costs you nothing and keeps this conversation going. Thanks so much for listening. See you next time.